The Gemara that we learned yesterday was about Kimcha Dechiti. Well, actually, before that, we explained the Gemara according to Teves. So maybe I should go over that. We mentioned that there are different ways of understanding the Gemara, even within Rashi itself. There are different ways of learning Rashi. The previous Gemara, it was all about on Shabbos taking medicine and gargling, and ultimately, what it boiled down to was the question of how would you come to reciting a bracha on olive oil, because olive oil is normally not drank. You don't normally drink it right out the way it is, and it's normally part of another food. Either you dip bread in it or you cook with it, but it's not the primary food. It's only like a secondary food. So the Gemara came up with an example where a person had a sore throat and they were mixing olive oil into some other food. In this case, it was called a nigroin. A nigroin is some type of a beet soup, and they would put olive oil in it. So the conclusion of the Gemara was that the way to have it on Shabbos is if you put the olive oil into this food, and then either you're not gargling it or it's not visible that you're drinking it for purposes of medicine. So there were different ways of learning, but ultimately, if you just mix it into the anigroin and drink it that way, it's not a problem on Shabbos. If you want to hold it in your mouth and possibly gargle it, and then that could be problematic, depending on how you learn the Rashi, Teves, different ways of learning Rashi. But if you're just going to drink it in the anigroin, that would be permissible. That's for sure permissible. And that would be a case where you would recite a bracha on the olive oil, because that's your main intent in drinking this anigroin, is to have the olive oil, because you're drinking it because your mouth is sore, because your throat is sore. So therefore, you would recite the bracha bari pri ha'etz on the anigroin, because the main thing in this scenario, the primary purpose of the drink is the olive oil. And the Gemara did have a thought that since you're getting since it's medicine, maybe you don't recite a bracha at all. And the conclusion of the Gemara is that it is that you would recite a bracha, because you islay hana'a mineh, you are getting benefit or enjoyment from it. So now the next Gemara that we learned also yesterday is a Gemara that talked about Kimcha Dechiti, and we tried to figure out the different interpretations of what it refers to. The simple meaning of the words is kemach, which is flour, of chiti, of wheat flour. However, Teves doesn't seem to want to explain it in the simple way, because he says, who eats wheat flour? So he wants to say it's probably not ground as much. It's a little more coarse, or possibly it's some type of a dried out, that it's roasted, dried out type of flour, similar to oats and oat flour. In any event, however you want to learn it, the Gemara's question is, what bracha would one recite if they have this kimcha dechiti, which we're just going to translate as flour, wheat flour. So if a person has that, what bracha would they recite? We mentioned there's an argument for Rabbi Yehuda Rav Nachman. And Rabbi Yehuda said that it retains its bracha. If you would eat kernels, wheat kernels, what bracha would you recite on wheat kernels? Wheat kernels they grow from the ground, right? So it would be a bari pri ha'adama, for the same bracha as vegetables. It grows from the ground, creates the fruit from the ground. You would recite on wheat kernels bari pri ha'adama. So here, what happened is it's ground. It's now milled, and it's now turned into flour. So flour, does that lose its status or not? So Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it retains its status. It's still a bari pri ha'adama. And even though it's ground up, you would recite a bari pri ha'adama. because it's the same bracha as the actual kernel. However, Rav Nachman argues. Rav Nachman says no, it's changed, and shahakol nihya bidvara. You would recite, since it's changed. You don't now recite a bracha. You don't call it fruit of the ground like a vegetable. Instead, you would just say this is one of the items that Hashem has created, and we thank Hashem for all that He created. That's the bracha of shahakol nihya bidvara. Everything was created by Hashem's word, and so that is the Reb Nachman's opinion. So we have Reb Yehuda's opinion, it retains its status. Reb Nachman's opinion that it loses its status. It changes to a shahakol nihya b'dvar. Now, Rava told Reb Nachman, you shouldn't argue on Reb Yehuda because we have a little proof that Reb Yehuda's right. It retains its status. What's his proof? A famous Gemara that we've learned a few times. Famous statement. Olive oil changed its status. It definitely has been, changed the way it looks, and yet the bracha stays the same. What bracha do you recite on olive oil? Bracha creates the fruit from the tree. So even though the olives have been pressed and been made into oil, the bracha still retains its bracha status, the same bracha. So what would that imply? That flour should retain its status, even though it has changed its appearance and it has been changed from its form that it was in. You would think that it should be the bracha, according to the opinion of Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, it retains its status. Here also, flour should retain its status, and it should be bari pri ho'adama, creates the fruit of the ground, vegetables. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say, with the case of the olive oil, we said it doesn't change the bracha because it's still, the olive itself is called zayit and the shemen is called zayit. So we said because of that, we keep the bracha the same.
So
is the same about the wheat. The wheat changes its name from
the Gemara mentioned something along what you're saying with regard to something else. It didn't say that because it's called zayas, the tree is called zayas, that should be a reason why the olive oil should be considered a. The Gemara didn't really say that. The Gemara did mention something along what you're saying, that if we would change the bracha, how would we change it if we wanted to give it a more specific bracha? But that's not the purpose of reciting a different bracha would be because we want to specify the uniqueness of the olive oil. But the idea that it either retains its bracha or it loses its bracha and ends up being a shahako, that had nothing to do with the wording.
Okay.
The wording had something to do with making a new bracha for olive oil, which we were thinking.
Whether to make a new bracha or not.
A new special text for the bracha. That was about reciting
a new issue here.
No, here we're dealing with.
Change it because it's now kemach.
Yeah, does it lose its status of what it is, or does it go downhill and become just into the general category of shahako? Does it lose its status of bari pri ha'etz? Again, we're not dealing with the name, the word of what the olive tree is called. We're simply trying to figure out if it loses its status. Do we still call it a fruit? Because it did change. And do we call it a fruit, a produce of the olive tree? Would you call it like a fruit or not? And once it's changed too much, it's no longer called a fruit. This is not really called the fruit of the olive tree or the fruit of the ground. It's a flower called the fruit, the produce of the ground. Would you call it that? Is this the or does it lose its status of being called because once it goes through many changes?
I thought it's the same issue here, whether it's still chita or is it chitat kemach, like Shem and Zayit.
Yeah, no, I don't know that it has anything to do with the wording. That's your own insight, and maybe you could look into that. But I didn't see anything about the wording. There are cases in Talmudic study where we do deal with the wording, like min b'minoi. There's laws of something that gets nullified in something else, and does it go by, if it's called the same item, does it go by the taste, or does it go by the name, what it's called? So there are cases where we follow what you're saying. And there was a Gemara earlier that mentioned this idea of how would you word a bracha if you wanted to give olive oil a special bracha. So what you're saying is not it's not wrong. It's just not here. I don't know.
Not applied here.
Connected, yeah. So the Gemara mentioned that there's a big difference between olive oil and flour. They both did change from their original state, but there is a difference between the two, because olive oil has reached its ultimate goal. The goal of the olives is to reach olive oil, the ultimate purpose of it. That's what it's used for. And so it's reached its most improved state. Olive oil is the improved state. What is the improved state of wheat? The improved state of wheat is to be made into bread. And so you have changed it from the wheat kernel, you made it into flour, but you haven't made it yet into the bread, which would be the real improved state. So there's reason to say that you would not call this the fruit of the ground. You wouldn't consider it the peiros, because it's not the actual fruit, and it's not the ultimate purpose of the fruit. It hasn't reached, it's like somewhere in the in-between state. And so there's room to say that it lost its original status, and it doesn't regain its special status until you improve it appropriately. So what the Gemara is actually saying is that you've ruined it and you haven't fixed it up yet. You sort of ruined it until now. It was much more edible and like a kernel, wheat kernel. Now you've ruined it and made it into flour, and you haven't improved it yet to make it into bread. So you've ruined it from its original status, but you haven't given it its new status. And the Gemara says that would be a reason to differentiate between olive oil and flour. Yes, Susan.
Robert is first.
Oh, thank you. I guess, Rabbi, my thinking would be, it's not that it's ruined, but it's been made into an intermediate substance for it to then reach its potential. And so, it's incomplete, I guess is the word. Even with olive oil, we mix it with other elements, but like oil and vinegar, oil and olive oil, but they never really mix because each one maintains its own separate identity or chemical composition. Is the best way that I can figure that out.
Okay. All right.
You don't agree, but
I don't know
I
if
didn't
you
convince
need to say
you.
that.
Right.
What you're saying is not wrong. It's just I don't know if you need to come to that to explain why the bracha would be ha'etz by olive oil, and why the flour loses its status. It's not bad being flour. It's just that it has changed.
Right. It's not going anywhere yet.
Right. It didn't. Yeah. It changed. But okay. Yes, Susan.
When would we need to say a blessing over the wheat that's growing?
If you eat it, if you want to eat it, when you're eating it.
Raw in the state that it's in?
However you're choosing to eat it, that's up to you. But depending on when you choose to eat it, it's either considered edible, inedible. And even if it's edible, it might be in its proper state, or it might be its original or not really in its original state, and might lose its special bracha of being considered a fruit. So it all boils down to what stage you're eating it.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I had a question. If you're basing it on trying to improve its state from one level to another, so my question is regarding olives and olive oil, and the ability to satiate a person. If you're hungry and somebody gives you a choice between a nice plate of 20 olives or a cup of olive oil, most people are going to choose the olives instead of just drinking olive oil. So there's a level of satiation and satisfaction that comes from olives that's not there by olive oil.
Uh-huh. So you want to say that maybe this is not an improved state in all areas. It's not totally improved. Okay, well, Robert's going to answer.
Right. Well, my thinking is olives are a smaller entity versus the olive oil, and consequently, there's greater satiation in having and drinking the olive oil because there's greater volume, which would give you a greater sense satisfaction by drinking it than eating 5 small olives. That's my thinking.
Yeah, but nobody's going to go around drinking a cup of olive oil if they're hungry.
Well, interesting enough. Yeah, well, why not? If there's
Because
volume,
if you have a
but volume gives
choice,
you a sense of satisfaction.
yeah, but if you have the texture and the chewingness of 20 olives is going to be more satisfying to you than just drinking a cup of oil.
Well, I don't know. I guess we have to weigh the olives versus the olive oil, but I accept anything you say, David, because I respect you. That's important.
I appreciate it. Thanks. Now the question is, does the rabbi agree with me?
It's
So what it boils down to is this. On the one hand, you may say you can't really say that it's more satiating, because according to the earlier Gemara, we said that wine satiates a person and olive oil doesn't satiate a person. So you can't really say satiation is an issue here. But let's say just in general, you would say that there's maybe more nourishment from the olive oil or some type of a enjoyment from the olive oil. Nevertheless, Rabbi, if you take the entire picture, you will say that olive oil is an improved state, and it has reached an improved state that would allow it to retain the bracha of Boirei Pri Ha'etz. Now, you don't have to say necessarily that it's better than olives, but even though it's changed, it has reached an improved state. In other words, this is an improved state, which the change, in other words, through changing from the olives, you would call this an improved state. Olive oil is considered improved. And, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's improved in color, it's improved in its smell, it's improved in, in its size. These are not necessarily important. The improved state is the fact that olive oil is some type of an improvement. And the Gemara can call it an improved state and give it that, allow it to retain its bracha.
I guess I'm asking if it's more edible or less edible. You would think that olive oil is less edible than olives.
Right, and yet it's still considered more honorable, because it's going to be used for the purposes, whatever it's going to be used for. It has a certain value to it. That the name that the olive oil would still be called. This is like its ultimate purpose. The olives would be so this would be the improved state of the olives, and so it doesn't depend on the fact that you're saying you're not excited to drink it. And it only is drank by people with sore throats. But it doesn't really matter. It's still considered an improved state. Yes, Ben. One second. Moshe kept on trying to.
Yeah.
grain chips, which is an intermediate stage between the grain and the bread. So hamotzi lechem and haaretz is said is the elevated is the bracha that's said for once it turns into bread. The intermediate stage where it becomes a chip, where it can be turned into a chip and be eaten, is still adamah. Is that correct?
Correct, correct.
Okay.
Assuming that it's a decent sized chip, it's not flour. If it's flour, then that boils down to our Gemara, where it's questionable. It's either bar pri adama or shahak. That's our Gemara. And even if it's ground a little coarse, according to some opinions, that's the meaning of our Gemara. So, but you're talking about a case where it's a chip. Sounds much more not that it's just coarse. It sounds like it's a good piece, good size piece. Yeah. Okay. So Ben.
Yeah, I wanted to say with olive oil, it is an improved state because it's the concentration of the essence of the olive. You're getting rid of the pulp. And instead of eating 20 olives, you don't need a cup of oil. You take a little spoon of oil, and that's the essence of 20 olives. So, but it is an improved state.
Right. The only thing is that, you know, if we try to explain how the value of olive oil for a regular person, it is going to be a little hard to do that because our Gemara earlier said, "Izoiki mazik." It like damages a person. This is like dangerous to drink olive oil straight.
Yeah, drink too much of it. Yeah.
So it would seem like it's not considered that you wouldn't the simple understanding is you don't even recite a bracha when you have olive oil. So so it's hard. It would be hard to say that olive oil is better than an olive. Let's say you have the size of a spoonful. But the point is that it is better because we're not just looking at for you eating it in your healthy state. We're thinking of the benefit of olive oil, the greatness of olive oil and the purpose of having the olives. Most people plant it for olive oil, at least in the olden days. And so, in that sense, this is the improved state of the olive oil. This is what you planted it. This is what people planted.
There are many uses for the olive oil.
Olive oil, right. So
for the
even though
it's just to eat it.
Right. So Dov is simply looking at the eating. Things. So if you want to only look at the eating, then you would have to say for sore throat, olive oil is better than olives.
Right.
Then you'd have to look at it that way. But just for a sore throat. But if you want to look at it in general, that would be another way to understand that it's improved, that it's reached its improved state. Yes, Robert.
The whole idea of drinking olive oil is that because of the intensity of the oil, your body synthesizes it a lot more efficiently and is better for your body. The obverse is I, as a diabetic, can eat an orange, but I cannot drink orange juice because of the intensity of the sugars that are in the liquid. And so that has a bad effect on my metabolism because of my diabetes, which is just, some of the practical things I deal with.
So what would that mean? That the liquid has more sugar than the
exactly. Than the natural,
orange
itself. It's concentrated,
more concentrated.
Yeah. So it's interesting because your body synthesizes this, and that, and olive oil is a health drink. Just parenthetically, when I grew up in Massachusetts, there was a governor, and he said he drank a cup of olive oil every day for health purposes. He claimed that it kept his hair black than graying, but who knows?
How long did he live? I want to know how long he lived.
Until his late 80s. But in any case, we use so much olive oil in our cooking, salads, I'm sure, and other ways of eating that we may not realizing that we're getting it as a liquid.
Candles.
Yeah, it is interesting. I do know someone who was on a diet, like in one of these fasting diets, and he did say like a liver detox and things like that. He told me that after you fast for like 24 hours or something, or whatever, a day or two with just drinking water. So he used to drink a cup of olive oil. So it does seem to contradict our Gemara. because our Gemara did mention that olive oil is zoiki mazik, that it's dangerous, it's a sakana. So there are different ways of understanding that, the people's bodies, the nature, the science, health benefits do seem to change. There seems to be a change in things could have been healthy years ago and now aren't, and things that, generations back were unhealthy could be considered healthy now, or it could be that we don't know what we're talking about. We think olive oil is healthy and it's really not. But
we're there at different times and different understandings. Yeah.
Right. So there is a concept of nishtanu hativim, the nature has changed. So it's brought in the rabbinic writings that nishtanu hativim.
You have said in the past that there are those who then write, if not revisions, but different adaptations of what the benefits of eating something is. I mean, is that part of the continuity of understanding how, when we eat food, what it does to improve, to give us greater life, longer life, or health? I mean, that's part of the discussion that the students have, the rabbis have, relative to modern technology and its effect on our lifestyle and our health.
So there is a need to figure out how to apply the application of things in the Talmud, how to apply it to practical, the new things that we have today,
Right.
how to apply it, because the Shulchan Aruch and the Gemara did not have all the items that we have now. But if you're talking about health things, a lot of times we do have to say that there are certain changes and things that were, considered maybe healthy then, and they're not considered healthy now, or the opposite.
And is that codified somewhere?
Well, if you search Nishtanu Hativim, you can, if you search it, I'm sure you'll pick up a lot of writing. Nishtanu means it's changed. The nature has changed, and it is brought in rabbinic book, in rabbinic. Here, let me just pull it up here. Nishtanu Hativim.
Rabbi Smith? Rabbi Smith?
Yeah, who is this?
Philippe.
Philippe.
Oh,
Philippe,
yeah.
yeah. I understand that Maimonides codified with respect
Let me
to-
just before you speak, I just want to mention one of the things that they discuss is, for example, leaving food without a cover. Does in the olden days that was considered very dangerous.
Yeah.
Nowadays, is that dangerous to drink food that was that the cover wasn't on it. Also, if let's see. Let me just pull this up here. In the olden days, it says there's a benefit to eat a fish close to when it's about to spoil. And nowadays, that would be considered quite dangerous.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't want to get salmonella.
Rabbi Smith?
Just one more second. Now, there is a concept of washing one's hands between after a person eats fish and then meat, to wash one's hands, otherwise it could cause leprosy. And they say now it doesn't. Our nature is different. There was some concept of eating salt after every meal or after foods, and bisman hazeh, there isn't such a concept. There was an idea and mentioned in the Gemara that a person can't get pregnant from the first time they have relations, from her first relations, and the place can write that it's the nature has changed. People could get pregnant from the first time a woman first time she has relations, she could get pregnant from that. Many things with women with regard to pregnancy or menstruation. It used to be that in the Gemara it says only after 3 months of pregnancy does a woman stop seeing her menstrual bleeding. Nowadays, once she's pregnant, she already stops seeing menstrual bleeding, and so they say that changed. The Gemara says that the person who gives birth to a 7-month baby, it's not a full 7 months. It's generally less than that, and we don't. It's generally like 6 months in a few days or so, and like Moshe Rabbeinu was born as a 7-month baby, so that would be this week's parsha. But in any event, they say that nowadays
Could be born after 7 months.
but a 9-month baby is born after the full 9 months. In other words, they compare the two. A 7-month baby is not full 7 months, but a 9-month baby is a complete 9 months. And the fact is that it's not. Nowadays many women give birth during the 9th month. It's not a full 9 months. So that in that sense, it's changed. That the 9-month baby is not a full 9 months, even though in the Gemara it mentions that a 9-month baby is always a full 9 months. There are numerous other things. I don't want to. Let's see.
Rabbi Smith?
Another thing is they write that they don't use the medicines that is brought in the Gemara because our nature has changed. So even though the Gemara will mention a number of medicines, like for example here, drinking olive oil with nigrain with the beet soup, not necessarily should you go and do that. I mean, I don't know if it would be considered dangerous, but if the doctors consider it dangerous nowadays, so even though the Gemara says to do it, this is not a case where you would follow the Gemara because it's not a halacha. If it was a halacha is one thing. If it was a law, this is a advice about medicine, and advice about medicine could have changes in the era that you live, in the generation you live. There could be changes in science in the way things are because of maybe changes in the world and changes somehow people's nature changes, and that we do see that there have been some changes. So you have to keep that in mind when we deal with these type of laws. So I'm mentioning this because we're talking about olive oil, and some say that it's healthy for people to drink olive oil, as Robert spoke about one of the mayors in Massachusetts, and I was mentioning that it seems like some diets encourage olive oil drinking, but our Gemara said that it's dangerous, and to the extent that most opinions hold, you don't even recite a bracha if a person drinks olive oil. And so I'm mentioning this, that there is a concept of nishtanu hativim, that the nature of people do change, and therefore some things that could have been healthy then are not healthy now. Some things that are healthy now, not necessarily were they healthy then. Okay, so Phyllis, you wanted to, yes, you've been
Yes,
trying.
I would, please. First of all, with respect to the olive oil, according to the Ayurvedic tradition, and it actually does work, after a fast, there is a combination of, once one is completely evacuated, there is a concept that drinking olive oil with lemon juice will relieve the development of bile plugs that develop into gallstones, and it does work, in fact.
Well, I just want to mention the FDA has not approved this statement. Okay, continue.
Well, this has nothing to do with the FDA. This has to do with the Ayurveda. there's a book on it and it does work, but that's one point. The other point is that with respect to what Robert was asking, Maimonides did codify the relative healthiness of various foods and with respect to various purposes. And it was also indicated at that point anyway, that leaving water uncovered overnight was dangerous. At that time, they were talking about shadim, but now we would consider it germs, things that would be contaminations that might fall in. So, I mean, it may change, but at the same time, there's certain continuities in some of these traditions.
Oh, for sure, for sure. It doesn't mean everything changed. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Anyway, thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting point that you make about the olive oil and the lemon juice, mixture of olive oil and lemon juice. Okay, let's continue. So we mentioned this Gemara yesterday about the flour and how to differentiate between flour and olive oil, and that olive oil has reached its an improvement, and therefore it could be considered the fruit of the tree, because this is like the purpose of the tree, and that was the understanding of the difference. But here with the flour, the improvement would be the bread, and that would be. But here you haven't reached that improvement yet; it's still flour. Therefore, you would not call this the fruit. This would not be called the fruit, because it's not reached its improved level. Now, the Gemara is going to ask a question now, and ask that, is this true that something that doesn't reach its improved state, you don't recite the Borei Pri Ho'adama, the fruit of the ground, the vegetable blessing, but rather you only say Shahakol? Is that true? The Gemara said, don't we find that on some type of a gourd or a pumpkin, it's called a kara when it's raw, and on barley flour you recite Shahakol, and the Gemara says that implies that wheat flour would be Borei Pri Adama. So it seems like something that, even though it has a greater improvement with bread, but since now it hasn't, but even though it hasn't reached that stage, you still recite a Borei Pri Adama, because only barley flour, which is really much less edible. Barley flour is much less edible. In general, barley is considered animal food, and barley flour would be less enjoyable and edible than wheat flour. So it implies that wheat flour, you would recite, it retains its status, Borei Pri Adama. And what you would see from there is that even though something loses it changes, and it hasn't reached its ultimate stage, its improved state, but you still recite a Borei Pri Adama, because it only says barley flour is shahakol. It implies that wheat flour would be Borei Pri Adama. The Gemara answers, no, really, wheat flour is the same as barley flour. Both of them you would recite a shahakol, and because it hasn't reached its improved state. And the reason why Reb Zera, who quoted Reb Masna and quoted Shmuel, they spoke about a case of barley flour. Why didn't they talk about a case of wheat flour? Was because they wanted to emphasize that even barley flour, which is hardly edible, and you might think you don't recite a bracha at all, you do recite a bracha. Not the regular bracha, but a shahakol, because barley flour is really hardly edible. But wheat flour would also be shahakol. But barley flour, you might think that you don't recite a bracha at all. And therefore, they mentioned the case of barley flour that you do recite a bracha. Even though it's hardly edible, it is edible, and it does require a bracha. Then the Gemara asks, this is the new piece. It's Umi Gara. And I'm going to tell you where we're starting here. Umi Gara, we're on the first wide line. Umi Gara mi melach bezamis. Is this worse? You really think that barley flour, you're not going to recite a bracha? You might have had such a thought. Would barley flour be worse than melach and zamis? Melach is salt, and zamis is like brine, salt water. Would it be worse than eating salt? Is it that inedible that it's not even like salt? The Tanya, because we have a brisa, we learned in a brisa that al hamelach ve'al azamis, on salt and on salt water, you do recite a bracha, even though it's not the norm to go drinking salt water, but people do recite, but you would recite a bracha. So why would anyone think that barley would be barley flour would be any worse than salt? So why would the brisa have to say such a case of barley flour to tell you that you do have to recite a bracha? In other words, this, by asking this question, the Gemara is trying to knock off everything that we said earlier, because if we prove from this that barley flours obviously have to say a bracha, that will mean that the fact that they chose to mention barley flour is not to tell you need to say a bracha, but to tell you that barley flour is different than wheat flour. And that would mean that wheat flour maybe is the bracha bar priyadama. And that would mean that anything that changes, even if it didn't reach its ultimate goal in its improved state, you would still recite, it retains its original bracha. So again, this has like a domino effect. If we change something now, it's going to actually have some type of effect on the previous argument. So the Gemara says,
Rabbi?
Yes.
Yeah, the example you gave with salt water, but the water itself, you still make a bracha. The fact that you added salt, to me, is irrelevant.
Well, that depends on how much salt is in it. If it's like inedible, then I don't know that I would recite a bracha on that water. It's, it's awful. I mean, have you ever, I remember after, some dental work, removing my wisdom teeth. So you have to drink this real strong salt. I mean, it's awful. That salt water, you could even, it could cause you to throw up. It's like so salty. So, it depends on how much salt, you know what I mean? But if you're talking about a drop of salt, you're right. There's no question. But we're talking about, obviously, there's much more salt than a drop. Okay. I don't know if it's the amount that you would vomit, because I don't think that you would recite a bracha from. But but I think somewhere in the middle, like salt water, which is not the norm to drink, that it wouldn't be normal to drink it. If you just put a few drops of salt in, I mean, that's no different than regular water. They probably do that in the North Miami Beach reservoir. They probably add some salt, sodium, who knows what, chlorine and But no, we're dealing with this is brine, some type of a salt water that's more serious, so that normal people don't drink it. Maybe if you're drunk, maybe a person who's drunk, sometimes they like to drink pickle juice or something. So I don't know if that maybe the salt helps. I don't know. But in any event, yeah, we're dealing with the more serious salt water. So the Gemara says that it does need to tell us that barley flour requires a bracha. Salka daito chamina, I would have thought to say melach v'zamis avidinish tashadi lepume. A person does sometimes put it in their mouth, and abal kimcha desairi, but barley flour, however, kasha lekukiyani, it causes worms in the stomach, some type of intestinal worms. So loy livrach alei klal, a person you would think should not recite a bracha at all, because this is sort of causing some type of a health issue to the person. Kamash malan, it comes and lets us hear kivan dislei hanamine, since a person does benefit from it while they're eating it, they're enjoying it, and they're somewhat, they're getting some benefit, is getting some enjoyment. So boy bruche, it does need a bracha. So even though, what the Gemara is saying is barley flour is worse than salt or salt water, because barley flour, it does cause could cause some medical issue and some type of worms in the stomach. So because of that, there's reason to say that you wouldn't recite a bracha at all. And the conclusion of the Gemara is, yes, you do recite it. What bracha do you say? Shehakol miyam varoi. You recite a shehakol, but you do recite a bracha. Now, I just want to touch base. This brings us back to an
Don't we
old.
eat barley in the chulent?
Just 1 second. We have Susan had a question first, but okay. Let me answer Susan. Susan, what?
I just wanted to say that at this time they're talking about parasites being caused from barley flour.
Yeah.
That's what they're talking. Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
Yes. Yeah, Ben, you're asking about barley. Barley is different than barley flour. And barley flour made into a food is also, the Gemara is not talking about that. We're dealing with barley flour that a person eats raw. It hasn't been made into bread or made into spaghetti or made into,
maybe there are worms that like to eat that, and that's why it creates a problem. It's not that it's going to create a worm.
Well, if there are worms in it, that would probably, the Gemara would say you're not allowed to eat it. Then you wouldn't be allowed to eat it. So it must be either they're minuscule, that they're not visible to the naked eye, and that would be reason why you would be allowed to eat barley flour, and ultimately, or somehow there's something in it that could cause these worms to multiply in one's stomach. I don't know, but you'd have to find out from the science if there's any. That would be interesting to look into, if parasites, if there's any foods that cause specific foods cause parasites, or they live off certain foods. Maybe normally parasites die, and now these foods could like garlic, they die, causes them to die. They can't handle the smell or something. But like other foods, maybe they live off. It's sort of like back to these parasites. So maybe people naturally have certain parasites, and the thing is that normally they die off, and maybe barley flour is something that they would live on. Now, what I wanted to mention is this: the previous Gemara, we said olive oil. We said the common view is you do not recite a bracha from drinking olive oil in the time of the Gemara, when it was unhealthy to drink olive oil. It said azuki mazik, it would cause a person damage. It would be dangerous to drink. And I did mention that the Rambam says something very innovative, and he says, but you would have to recite a bracha shehakol. You don't recite the bracha on olive oil when you drink olive oil, very pre-ha'etz, but you do recite a shehakol niya b'dvara. You do recite the more generic bracha of shehakol, which all the commentaries question, where do you get such a thing from? This is dangerous. Olive oil is very dangerous. So some want to say that this Gemara that we just learned is the source of the Rambam, his view on olive oil, because our Gemara just said that barley flour, what is it? It causes some sickness. It could cause parasites. And what does the Gemara say? You still have to recite a bracha. You recite some type of bracha. Shehakol, you do recite a shehakol on barley flour, even though it has negative health impact. So the same thing would be with olive oil, according to the Rambam. That's the way the Rambam would learn, and that's why that this is the source that the Rambam says if you drink straight olive oil, you would recite a bracha. Now, according to that, we have to ask the question on the other view. The other view says that olive oil, you don't say any bracha at all. How is that different than barley flour that causes parasites? How would you differentiate olive oil? They said you don't say any bracha, dangerous. Barley flour, recite a shehakol. You do have to recite a bracha, even though it causes kukiyani, which is some parasites. So how can you? What's the difference? This is dangerous, and this is unhealthy. That's unhealthy. So you have to say that olive oil is considered dangerous to drink. This could cause in the future, it could cause some type of some issue. It's not automatic. It's not immediate. This is something, you're going to eat too much cholesterol it'll cause, and when you reach the age of 70, you might have a cholesterol issue, but it's not a danger to eat barley flour, so therefore, even though it could cause kukiani, nevertheless, it's considered, you would recite a bracha on it. So it has some could have some negative impact on your health, but it's not immediate and it's not definite. Another thing is it's not really definite. It's kosher l'kukiani, which means it could cause. It's not automatic that it's happening. Now the other point that has to be discussed is what happens if a person eats something that is dangerous for them. For example, someone that's diabetic, they want to eat a donut. So would they recite a bracha on the donut? Is that like eating olive oil? Olive oil is dangerous. Common view is you don't recite a bracha on olive oil. So what would be for them eating a donut? I mean, if they have their that shot, the stuff, what they take, if they have their medicine with them.
Insulin.
Insulin, right? Thank you. If they have the insulin, so then it's not dangerous for them to eat the donut. But if they don't have the insulin with them, let's say they're traveling and they don't have access, they're on a plane, a long plane ride, and so on. And so the question would be, would they recite a bracha? They can't control themselves, but so the donut looks too enticing. But the thing is, this is dangerous for their health, extremely dangerous. And so the question is, would they recite a bracha? And the answer, it's said from one of the big Paiskim, one of the big halachic rabbis in Israel, that in such a scenario, they would recite the first bracha. They wouldn't recite the final bracha, the after bracha. The first bracha you would recite before the food, because even if you just have a drop, you need to recite that bracha. And eating a drop of a donut, like a little a crumb, would not be dangerous. And therefore, they would need to recite a bracha because of the crumb that they're eating. But then they ate a whole donut, that would be considered dangerous. And therefore, someone who does something that's dangerous, eats something that's dangerous, does not recite a bracha, and therefore they would not recite the bracha, the after bracha. Again, it would depend on how serious the diabetes they have and how how dangerous a donut is for them. Of course, it would obviously depend on the scenario. And I'm talking about a person that does, but that would be that's what I'm told from one of the halachic rabbinic authorities. Yes, Ezra.
But if you're taking your insulin,
yeah, that's a different story. But what happens if he doesn't have they don't have insulin with them or something like that, right? If they have insulin, I guess it's not considered dangerous. So
so you would
I would
say the bracha at the end.
Yeah. Then it's not dangerous anymore. Okay, so
Can I just make a clarification?
Yeah.
If I may. Diabetes is a degenerative disease. As we get older, our organs start failing us. So what we have to do is control our diet so it does not negatively impair our functions. So I'm not in such an agreement just because thank goodness I don't have to take insulin, but I have to take pills. But again, it's degenerative, and you should not essentially gorge yourself with food that is known to be deleterious to your health. And so that to me is a very important reality of my life.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks for adding that to what we said. So the Gemara, the next piece of Gemara talks about kaira. Kaira, it sounds like the previous, we had kara before, so just don't get confused. Kara before meant like a pumpkin or a gourd. This word kaira is something that grows on the palm trees. The simple understanding is shoots that grow from the palm tree. When initially they are soft and they're edible. And there is a understanding here that it could mean hearts of palm as well, but that's not the, it doesn't, I don't know that definitely there are others that there are some that don't learn it that way. They believe it means the shoots. That's the simple understanding here, that it means the shoots, but there are such commentaries. So anyway, Kaira, Rav Yehuda Amar Bari Pri Adama, Shmuel Amar Shakol Niyam B'Dvarim. Yehuda says that this is, even though it's from a tree, but you would recite the blessing, Bari Pri Adama creates the fruits of the ground. Rabbi Yehuda says. Shmuel says, Shakol Niyam B'Dvarim. Shmuel says, you recite Shahakol, the general bracha, that everything is created from Hashem's word. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says, why does you recite Bari Pri Adama? Peirahu. This is considered fruit. This is a fruit of the, not of the tree, but it is it is considered a fruit. It is a growth from the ground, and deserves a bracha. It's considered like a fruit. Shmuel Amar Shahakol Niyam B'Dvarim. Shmuel says it's Shahakol because Hayel V'Seifei Li Kashos. It is in the end going to be hard. It's going to become hard, and therefore it would. It's not always going to be edible, and therefore it would lose its unique bracha of being called a fruit, because it's something that hardens. It's not really officially a fruit. It's and therefore it would be Shahakol Niyam B'Dvarim. You would recite that bracha. So why doesn't it get the bracha of a tree? Why don't we call it Bari Pri Ha'etz like apples and oranges? You say Bari Pri Ha'etz. This is from a palm tree. You would think it should be Bari Pri Ha'etz, and the answer is that this is not the fruit of the palm tree. The palm tree fruit is like a date. That would be a coconut. These are the fruits. This is a part of the actual tree. It's part of the trunk and the growth of the actual tree. So it's not a fruit. You can't say Bari Pri Ha'etz creates the fruits of a tree, because it's not a fruit of a tree. It's the fruit of the ground. It's something that grows, ultimately grows from the ground. And therefore there might be room to say Bari Pri Adama, or according to the other opinion, well, it hardens, it's not always edible. Therefore, he says the bracha would be Shahakol Niyam B'Dvarim. And we're going to actually, let's do one more line. So, Amar Le Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda Shinana. Shmuel told Rabbi Yehuda, he says, you know what? You're a sharp student. He was telling the one he argues with. Shmuel, who says it's Shahakol, he told Rabbi Yehuda, you're quite sharp because you got a good source to your opinion. It's a little vague if Shmuel wanted to change his view or not, because he's now telling Rabbi Yehuda, it seems like you got a good point. Shinana, sharp one. Kavosach mistabra, it sounds like you might be right. What about radish? Radish is going to get hard. So you could have vegetables that get hard, they're inedible at some point, and yet when they are edible, you recite a bracha Bari Pri Adama. So even though later on it's going to become inedible, but at this point it's edible, and therefore the bracha would be Bari Pri Adama. The Gemara says, but it's not really so. What Shmuel was complimenting Rabbi Yehuda, but the Gemara says B'loihi, but really it's not so. It's not really a good proof. Snoin, not the Yenesh Adaita the Pugla. Snoin, radishes people plant in order to eat the radish while it is soft. Dikla, the palm tree, people don't plant it with the intention of eating these palm shoots, but rather they have intention of eating the fruits from the palm, and therefore you can't call it a pre, an actual fruit, it's not really planted for this. This is part of the tree. It is a growth of the ground, but it's not really, it does get hard. It doesn't have like the full-fledged meaning of being a fruit. And therefore, Shmuel's statement would be valid that it should be shahakol niyabin faroi, because soifei lehikashos, it is going to get hard. Okay, we're going to stop here.
Great.
Sei gesund, everyone. We'll see you later, Mitzvah Shem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye, everyone.